right, all right. We are bypassing. Normally we have our weekly trailer that has the man in the mirror. Ooh. Yep. I got to do a little. Dan was not pleased with that. I could see the look on his face. And so here's how kind of it's going to roll. You guys, if you had signed up and clicked into that, you got a little message that you can reply back to, and I'll be checking in on those as well. We also have questions that were sent in throughout the series. So Dan and Chris and I spent some time going over those questions and looking into things. We're going to get to as many as we can. What we don't get to is going to be posted on the blog at brandedwithlove.com. The easiest way, if you're like, I don't have time to write down all this stuff, the best way is to download the Forefront Church app or connect with us on social networking, because you can access, we'll post links to the blog on Wednesday morning where all questions we don't get to, we're going to answer there. And so we don't want you to feel left out at all. And if you do the text to connect, and we're going to send out another one that goes on during our 11 a.m. service. And so if you go, man, I had a question and I didn't think about it till after we left, you can still reply back. We're still going to get to all those questions as well. And so make sure as you're doing that, especially as you have your mobile devices out, we want you to use those. But if you'll silence those, and that'll be super. The other thing that we want to make sure that we frame the discussion with as we talk today, two things. One of which was from the very beginning of what we ended up jumping into when we did the first week. And we wanted to kind of frame it this way, and it'll be here on the screen, and you can check it out there, is that mental health is not a character defect. Mental health and mental illness is not a character defect, a spiritual disorder, an emotional dysfunction. And most of all, it's not a choice. When we deal with these things and we battle with these things, no one wakes up in the morning and says, I would really love to battle with schizophrenia. No one wakes up in the morning and says, I would really like to be depressed. That would be awesome. We don't plant our feet on the ground and hope for these things. These are things that, due to being in a broken world, the world is not as God designed. God designed it perfect. We fractured that. And so from now till the time that we die, there is going to be a wrestling, a battle for some of these things. And there are a lot of questions out there that we just don't understand. And so we want to make sure that we frame this conversation properly today as we look at that. The other thing that you'll see as we walk through these questions is every single thing that we talk about in this realm really boils down to three key ways to focus on and tackle these types of wrestlings, these types of illnesses and all this, and it would be the three next steps that we would look at. And that's first and foremost, bringing your worries, your cares, your anxiety, your depression, and all this to God. That living it out through faith is the number one thing to do. And we're going to talk a little bit about how that plays out practically. The second thing was bring others into the conversation. There's some great questions that have already started to come in about this, about how do I talk to other people about this? I'm scared to, and those type things. And we're going to look at those. But you can't do this alone. The third thing is, and we believe this is a threefold process, is going to a professional, whether it's counseling, whether it's a doctor through medication, that there's not an end-all be-all answer that you have to frame this and go, nope, if you don't have enough faith, then that's why you're still hurting, is what some people would say that have been Christians for a long time, whatever, and we would say, no, that's not true. You have three men who follow God and trust him, who all have had individual battles with some of the things we'll talk about today, and you've heard that as we walk through the series. And so I don't want anyone to think like, oh, no, it's just God, or oh, no, I'm just going to talk to my friend at work, or oh, no, I'm just going to trust the counselor. There are multiple pieces to this puzzle, and we'll talk about those today. And so, everybody feel good? You all right? Yeah? All right. And so I want to make sure you guys feel comfortable. And as we jump into these questions, I'm going to toss them to these guys sometimes. I'll jump in and answer them. Please remember, text those questions in. Again, depending on time, we'll get to as many as we can, but we want to make sure that no one sits quietly and doesn't have something, has something that they want to ask but didn't get a chance to. And so if we don't get to it today, we'll make sure we hit it. And so we're going to jump in. You guys ready? All right, let's do this. Question number one. How can you know the difference between mental illness and just a struggle?
Well, I would say first, well done Well done who asked this question, because it means a couple things. It means that you think, feel, emote, and experience. And that's what we all do. And that's what life is all about, is the things that we experience and how we feel and then how we react to them. So I think it's really important. The first thing to say on this one is that we are built for that. That's how God made us. So we are sort of the sum total of our experiences, which is great because that's how he made us. So we should love, and we should to some extent feel bad about things as we experience them. And some struggles are actually very, very normal. When your kid starts to walk for the first time, it's an emotional moment. When you put your child on the bus for the first time, or you hand them off in marriage, those are awesome things. And sometimes those are transition points that we struggle, but it's important to struggle through those things. But the essence of this question really is when does it become more than a struggle? So I kind of think about it like this. When I walk around my house in the dark and I stub my toe, well, that hurts. And to some level, that would be considered a injury. Now, outside of breaking my toe, it would be just a minor sort of, I'll transition on. I might say something that I'm not really proud of when I do that, but I will continue to walk on. Now, if I'm out back in my backyard in my bare feet and I happen to drop a cinder block on my foot, that's a completely different story and will probably cause a lot more damage, and I will have to get probably some more extensive treatment for that. So the essence of this question is, when does it become a stubbing your toe, and when does it become a compound fracture of something?
So I think what I'm always looking for when I'm trying to figure out if mental illness is to consider is what's the track record of the problem? If you're dealing with anxiety or depression, is it just in this moment, or is it something that's been a long struggle? And can I tie it to an event? Like Dan lists some events that would cause us to have some distress. And so if you can say, yeah, my heart is hurting because, I just gave my baby away in marriage and I'm trying to, adjust, I would say that's not mental illness. That's adjustment to a specific event. But if you're in the circumstances where you're like, I have no explanation, like I'm just waking up and I'm feeling terrible, I'm feeling anxious all the time, and it's not just a day or a phase or a moment, but it's like long standing, like you can go and say, man, I've been dealing with this for a while. That's when I'm more inclined to say, hey, let's go to a doctor, let's get checked up, let's see what's going on. There's probably something going on that we're not aware of.
Yeah, I just like to kind of balance, kind of talk about with those. You look for patterns. You begin to see, is this a constant thing, or is this, and you might see a pattern in bad decision making, like lifting cinder blocks with bare feet. That would be a bad, whatever that would be.
You gotta put some shoes on, bro.
Yeah, is you walk through this and you go, what are the patterns? Am I seeing this pop up constantly, or is this a one-time thing? And if it is, that's when you would kind of jump into that. Question 2, I'm terrified to take medication. Why do you open the door to this possibility?
I get it. Medication is a scary thing to jump into. And I think the root of that question for whoever asked that would be, what is it about taking medication that, frightens you or makes you uneasy? I am a medication-taking individual, and I was hesitant about that for a long time. But really, I think we take medication because it works in some cases. Let me break that down a little bit more for you. As I shared a couple weeks ago, my battle has been depression, and I have used medication in that process, and I'm a lot better for it. You can ask these two up here. They've seen me when I was not handling it that way, and it was not good. But what I know about that is medication is not my end-all, be-all for dealing with that. And medication is part of it. And I think one of the things that sparks this fear in us is, am I committing to dependency on medication? I don't understand how medication works. I've heard nightmares or even have had experiences with side effects. And all those are valid. I think when you work on the medication path, it's important that you have a doctor who cares about your mind, your body, and your spirit, and walks with you through all of that.
I want to kind of tag into this because there's somebody who actually jumped in. Says, what about kids with mental illness? What are some of the strategies for balancing medication, counseling, et cetera, and God with kids in this realm of a day and age, and not to fault the world of counseling and medication, but we see a diagnosis that sometimes jumps straight to medication. And so maybe if you guys can jump.
Well, on the question of a child, here's the kind of the good and the bad news. Psychology and psychiatry for children is relatively new. The progress with it. Working with adults in those areas, there's a whole lot more information and studies on that. With children, it's much more complicated, and there's a lot less history, which is scary, I'm sure. But I think it goes back to weighing options, and I think it's very important to get not only your medical doctor involved. It's kind of like what I said last week. I think I said it. But your medical doctor is trained, and not a full-blown psychologist or psychiatrist, obviously, but your general practitioner has knowledge in mental health issues, so do pediatricians. So I think it's very, very important to, number one, get to a good doctor who is interested in the whole health of the child. But then it's very important to balance that with a good counselor, child psychologist, child-related mental health practitioners. And even with adults, I would say you have to weigh your options. You have to go between the medical and the psychological to kind of see which is the best combination. But you have to be persistent, and you have to ask a lot of questions.
Well, I was going to say, I think you get trapped because you feel like, man, I'm dealing with depression, I'm dealing with anxiety, I'm dealing with ADD, and everybody says medication is the next step. There are in-between steps. I'm always, when I'm seeing people at the practice, I'm saying, what's your diet like? What are your exercise habits like? What kind of activities are you doing in your spare time? And if I see a parent that brings me a child is like, well, he eats junk food all the time, he doesn't get outside, and he's playing Xbox 10 hours a day, I'm like, let's not jump to medicine. Let's talk about some of the lifestyle things that could be contributing. But the point is there's a process to work through if you want to do it healthily.
To kind of wrap this question up, when you talk about medication, I sense a little bit of fear in the question, why would you open the door to that possibility? As someone who's had battle with addiction, and some of us have had a battle with that in various forms, this is a totally scary thing. What if I get addicted to the very thing that I need to help me? This is why walking this out with someone who is professional and someone who trusts God. That's why we refer people to various different Christian counselors and practitioners that are able to help with that. And I would say as we talk about these things, there are going to be questions of like, how do I pick a counselor? How do I jump into this? How do I say the right thing? All that. We would much rather you come to us, so we're able to help you walk through that. Dan has worked through the counseling practice. Chris is a licensed counselor. I've done pastoral counseling for the last 17 years. And so as we walk through this, we want to be able to help you. And so as you're asking these questions and walking through these, it's super important to be asking some.
Just a quick addition to this. Last week I talked about denial, just to put a wraps on this. Look, you can pretend like nothing's wrong, but there may be something wrong. And you've got to take a step because from a spiritual standpoint, there is hope. There is hope. So don't deny what you need, what your body's telling you, what your emotional health is telling you. You need to take the step that's going to make you healthy.
And so there was a great question, and we're gonna jump on, but I like this one, and we'll answer it. How do you deal with a situation where medication makes you apathetic towards most things in life, including your faith? I took medication that made me basically like go, I just don't care. This is why taking it and adjusting it and getting it right and moving through these are really important. We're going to answer that one more online, but that's huge. And I think the way we're answering some of these kind of helps a little bit with that. Question 3, if you're always going to struggle with this is a question that came in my week when I talked about anxiety and casting it to God. If you're always going to struggle with this, and so you keep battling it, why is it not insanity to keep running back to God and then not see change? And so you're running, and we kind of drew a diagram of like there's person A that has a battle, tough battle with these things. Person B, same battle. Person B runs to God and begins to have glimpses of hope, not gone away, not written off, not better. We always say, you don't come to God and it's roses, rainbows, and butterflies, but they begin to watch this change that takes place. My thing is, if you stay in this category and don't turn to God, then you're just going to continue down that road. There is a point where we transition over to trusting God and some of these other threefold processes that allow us to go, man, it would be insanity to just sit in this category and not keep running back to God. But I think all of us could kind of concur that when we've had battles and we've run to God, while it hasn't been easy and it hasn't been like, I'm completely whole, man, does it get better.
And I might be making an assumption, so forgive me if this is your question and I'm making an assumption, but I think the idea is if I keep running to God and he's not curing me, if he's not removing this completely, then am I not insane for continuing to do that? And with me, it's not that I don't think God can heal. I've seen God heal. I've seen God work in miracles in people's lives. But what this does is it sets the tone that my purpose for having God in my life is that he will come down and he will heal everything that I present to him, where the real desire we should be working towards in our relationship with God is that he walks with us, that he cares for us, that he gives us strength. And in that regard, if that's what I have access to, I feel like it would be insanity not to tap into that while I'm going through something. God also works by putting people and resources in our lives, and we will look away from those sometimes. I've been guilty of this myself. I'm more talking to me than anybody. But we'll look away from the relationships and resources that he's put into our lives and just say, God, how come you haven't snapped your fingers and taken this from me? And to me, again, it's insanity to say, well, he's put all these avenues, good friends, a good church, good pastors, good counselor, good doctor. He's put all those at your path, and you turn away from them because you have your expectations set a certain way.
A lot of you are texting in because I've been getting them and checking them about letting people in. We're going to get to that. And so if you're like, they haven't answered that, trust me, we're going to get it on that. And I want to jump into question number 4 here. And I'm going to read this one, and then we have another one that came in. I've been to a counselor before, and nothing seemed to help. Why keep trying? The question that came in, I cannot get the right diagnosis. They keep saying depression, but I think it is more like multiple personalities. We hear this from people, I went, and I don't feel like I got help. And so, Dan, I know you, when we were talking about this, you had a good response to this.
Yeah, because I got a couple of emails on this, too. Look, this boils down to finding the right provider. If you were to go into a doctor and you didn't feel right about that particular doctor, you would seek a second opinion. The thing with and doctors have ethics that they practice under, but counselors have very strict ethics that we practice under, and one of them is to refer. If you have somebody who comes in and you're not sure how to take care of them, you need to refer them. And if somebody comes in and says, I don't think you're really helping me, you have a responsibility to refer them. So here's something to think about when you go in and see a counselor. When you go in and see a counselor, you should know what the plan is going to be for your particular situation. They should tell you generally what direction they want to go with your treatment, and you have an option at that point to either say, no, I need to seek somebody else, or you need to start picking apart what their plan is and asking them questions about the direction that he or she's going to go, because it may not be the right person for you. You probably have a lot of experience.
Yeah, I've done that plenty of times where I said, hey, I don't think I'm the fit for you, or I'm not understanding what you're bringing to the table here, but I think I know somebody that would be a perfect fit. I'll send them out. And I would also say, and I'm speaking now from the professional side, depending on how long you've been battling, we might need more than that first 45-minute session to pick it apart and figure it out. I know when I look at somebody, I'm like, what's going on right now in this moment that they're struggling with versus like what's the big picture of things that they need to work on or that they want to work on. We're learning you. And there are some counselors who are better than that than others, but if you feel like they're not even at that spot where they're trying to learn, ask questions, or listen to your input, then it's time to seek somebody else.
just two real quick things on this. One, if you were to go to physical therapy, if you had an injury, the only way you're going to get better in physical therapy is if you do what they suggest that you do. Okay, and that's the same way in counseling. A lot of people think you go into counseling and they're going to fix you. That's not what should happen. What should happen is you, depending on the situation, they give you skills and things to do for you to try and implement, and it takes time. Here's one really quick thing, because somebody emailed me and asked me this week. We got the Mirror card. I sent this person an email, and I said, hey, why don't we meet up? And they responded, I would love to, but I don't know how much it costs. For you guys to come in and talk to any of your pastoral people on staff, that costs nothing to you other than your time, and it's well spent. And if you're not sure about how to navigate through this counseling thing professionally, you've got two people who have worked in that realm who can definitely help you either open the door or at least help you with the proper language and things you need to articulate to a counselor.
One of the questions is it talks about, so picking the right counselor, being able to jump in with this, being able to walk through it, and then and also trusting them. This question came in, this is like on the spiritual side of this. Are you supposed to keep praying that God take away your depression and change you when it never happens? When you talk about, I'm visiting the counselor, and it feels like at first, but giving it time and doing it. We have people who walk into Forefront on a Sunday morning who have never been to church, haven't been to church in a decade, and they walk in and go, man, that felt awesome. Then they leave and they go, how come I'm not changed? I'm like, 60 minutes isn't going to revolutionize your 30 years of making bad choices. And so when you do this, and this, whoever texted this in, and I don't know who you are, I just see, digits on here and then your text. I'll tell you this, from somebody who battled depression and anxiety, who still battles anxiety, not so much with depression, I prayed for about 5.5 years that I would be happy. And we're going to get to this concept. 5.5 years, and there was one time where I sat, and I've shared this in a sermon years ago, where I sat with a cup of bleach wanting to be done with life. And I didn't. And I have an amazing wife, 3 beautiful girls. We're glad they look like their mom. I get to share the stage with 2 amazingly godly men, and even more so our staff and elders. And had I made the decision in those moments, God wasn't done with me. I just didn't want to walk through the process. And it goes to this next question that I wanted to kind of share that to lead into it, is how do you battle back against suicidal thoughts? Does God understand if I end it? This question really scared me. Not because you're asking it. I'm so glad you asked it. This question scared me because I feel like this person has already planned something out. And all of us kind of felt that way. Like, you've thought about this. I want you to come talk to someone. For out of the gate. And you might be like, I'm scared. We have so many people who work in military and first responders who go, if I talk about this, my career or my job or whatever could be in detriment. My family could be in detriment. You come and talk to one of us. It is not something to play around with. And we want to help you. You hear about love, you hear about hope, you hear about grace. And I know what it's like to sit there. I don't want that for you, and we don't want that for you as a church.
I think it's really important to understand that I don't think there's anybody who's been alive longer than, 5 minutes, who doesn't at some point wonder why they're here. There's a fancy word for it called this existential battle that we have. Why are we here, and what is our meaning? And sometimes we can wander off, depending upon where we're at, to start wondering whether we should be here at all. Okay, so there is that kind of pervading thought in humanity that where we question. But when it starts to wander off into a deeper, more persistent, darker, very isolating kind of thought process, then we have to be asking hard questions of ourselves. And the question is perfect. Battle. It is an absolute battle, and it's a battle that you have to fight. There are spiritual forces out there that want to deceive you into thinking that you're the worst person in the world, or you're terrible, or whatever, and that is a lie. And what we hear all the time when somebody like a Robin Williams commits suicide is we go, why didn't he say anything? He was, Why didn't he reach out? We say that, but it's a stigma when you start to get this idea of reaching out. It can be very, very hard. So you're in a battle if you're thinking about this, and you've got to come see somebody immediately.
Question 6, and then there's another one to kind of put in with this. And these are a couple of questions. We had a lot more questions come in. We narrowed them down just so that way you're like, but I asked it and worded it a little differently. We tried to compile them into something different to help out a little bit with time. My husband doesn't understand my anxiety. What can we do to make life easier? Most days don't end well. I want help in not feeling this way all the time, but I'm scared to tell my family and friends. Can't I just tell God and not tell them? And I want to add one more into this that came in because I think this is huge, and I may have to ask it again. How much do you share with your children when one of the parents withdraws from everyone? Man, I've watched this play out so many times. I'm sorry. From everyone and even them. So letting people in.
I think it's scary to let somebody in, especially when you're talking about something that you don't understand for yourself. And so a practical thing I'm going to give you guys without, addressing some of that deeper stuff is be careful who you talk to. Find people that are trustworthy, whether it's a spouse. And honestly, if you're in a place in your marriage where you guys are already on the rocks, maybe you need to talk to a counselor or a pastor or jail group leader or friend first to kind of get some balance. I'll tell you what's not good. It's very natural, but it's not good, and that is just to tell anybody that crosses your path. And what I mean by that is you've been holding this in and you've been struggling, and the moment you decide you want to share, man, you like talking to the girl at the register, you're posting on your Facebook wall about it. And what you're doing is you're giving an audience to hundreds of thousands of people with something that you're not even sure how to process yet. So for me, it's, man, find a person or two, best friend, spouse if you guys are good, pastor, counselor, and say, here's where I'm at. I need to pour all this out and let them help you kind of put it back together.
Not everybody's going to be helpful. There are going to be people that are not going to want to hear it. And that's another one of the stigma things that kind of drives people kind of isolating. So just being honest, you need to find the right person. But let me address the child of somebody, because that was me. I think it's very important. Two things about kids. This is more opinion maybe than anything. I think kids are a lot of times I'll hear parents say, kids are resilient. They'll handle it. I don't personally believe that. I think they're children for a reason. And the other thing is, I think kids are more perceptive than we give them credit for.
I can tell you, I've had a time where parents bring their kid in for therapy, and we're like, hey, what's going on? And he's like, yeah, mom and dad are just like,
Exactly.
He just poured it out of like, oh, your mom said you're doing bad in school. But what?
Yeah.
But like, he'll pour out this whole picture for me that mom and dad didn't even bring to the table. Like, so they know.
Yeah, I walk away from a lot of kids therapy thinking the parents are the ones that need to be in here, not the kid. But so I walked around a lot feeling like things were my fault, or I was the cause, or I have done something. So you have to walk a balance between explaining that mom or dad are not feeling well. It has nothing to do with you. They're seeing a good doctor. I personally don't think kids need to hear everything that's going on in their parents' life. That's just a good boundary. But I think kids need to understand that it's not their fault. It's not what they're doing. It's nothing that they've done. So please, if you're struggling with anything, whether it's a medical situation or a mental health issue, those kiddos got to know that you love them, you care about them, that they're safe, but that dad or mom is just struggling right now.
When I hear that first question, the husband doesn't understand my anxiety, what can we do as we process through this? Anything that's going on in your marriage before this hits. So say you're awful at communication. I know nobody's awful at communication here, just my wife and I. And so we work on that. And so you might be like, oh, how do we bring this in? All these things will illuminate whatever's happening. So when you say, when you ask this question, what I think is, man, there's also how do we communicate? It's so being able to open up that dialogue with someone else, bringing a third party in professionally to say, we can't process this, and I don't know. When I've had battles and I've tried to invite, especially with my anxiety, when I first started inviting my wife into the dialogue, my wife did not know how to help me. That doesn't mean that she's a bad wife. She just didn't know. And so being able to walk this journey out together. And so like Dan said, start with a counselor first, start with a trusted person first, and then invite that spouse into the conversation. And so when you talk about this sharing stuff with kids, man, Dan, you hit it. I don't think we have anything to add to that. Question 7. I'm depressed all the time, and I don't understand why I'm not happy. I'm trusting God in all the things you say on Sunday mornings, but I'm never happy. Why? This question, we talked about this and kind of came to the same conclusion. This question makes an assumption kind of out of the gate that God is about mine and your happiness. I want to make sure we do this right, because God is not about your happiness. If God was about my happiness, then he would not ask me when someone hurts me to turn the other cheek, because what would really make me happy would be to punch them in the face. I'm saying that's the fleshly side of us, all right? And so God is not about my happiness. He's about making you and I and all of us whole. Me being whole does not always feel good. Trust me, going to leg day at the gym makes me better, but it does not feel good. And so when we're processing these things and we look at depression and anxiety, and then we all of a sudden talk about God is about making you whole, and he is about creating in you a joy that transcends the situational and battles that take place in your life. And so when we've highlighted these moments, when my wife lost her mom and our household was under a cloud of hurt and pain, there was still an underlying joy as we parented our first child in the midst of that. As we lost our first child, and I was mad at God and shaking my fist at the heavens, we still were able to find a joy knowing that he loved us even. He was big enough to handle the anger and the frustration and all that, but not going, oh, why did God let that happen? Because God is about making you and I whole. He's not about making us happy, because there are tons of things that Jesus taught that don't make me very happy, but I know that they're what's best for me. It's like when you parent a child and you go, hey, don't put that fork in that outlet. That could be bad. And they go, oh, you don't, but I would be happy if I do that. No, actually you wouldn't. And it's not what's best for you. And what God does in the framework of that is, because I'm not about making you happy, but I am about making you whole. And that's going to take time, and that's going to be refinement. When Dan says sticking it out with a counselor, Chris is like, there's a process that goes through that. Being able to say, you know what, I'm going to walk through this, and I'm not going to be concerned about that happiness thing. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, this American dream. I want God's dream for me, not America's dream. I love this country, but I want what God has in store for me, because it's much greater than what man can provide. I don't know if that.
There's a section in the book of Philippians. Paul wrote it. It's in the New Testament, and he talks about a word that I think has kind of gone by the wayside in life now, and he uses the word contentment. And it doesn't sound necessarily like, wow, I'm content, woo! But but what Paul talks about in this is that when you start to look at this kind of happiness idea, Paul would say, my contentment comes from trusting God. My contentment comes from knowing him to the best extent that I can, loving him, and trusting in what he has for me. Now, that doesn't sound like rainbows and fireworks and all that stuff, but it really does talk about this sort of settled, it may be difficult, and he certainly had it difficult, but I'm going to be content because he loves me, and I'm going to trust him.
We're going to jump into question 8 here, and we're answering these. This is going to be the last one, but I want you to text any questions in that you have further, and we're going to add one to this. How do you deal with personal relationships that don't help you or hold you back? This is, you guys have been asking about some of these. How do you trust and let someone in when everyone you have let in has abandoned you? And I like this, and I want to kind of tack it on because I think it's important to talk about. When dealing in everyday life, should you put on, as you're helping and moving these people in, when dealing with everyday life, should you put on a fake, quote unquote, face or happy for the kids and family once the issue has been discussed, but you are still broken?
I don't feel like it's fake. I know what you mean when you say that. Like, I'm not this, but I have to act like this. I think you're setting yourself up, hopefully, to act how you want to be. In essence, you're kind of actually setting a goal for yourself. Like, all right, I'm going to pretend that I'm happy. I'm going to smile. I'm going to play with the kids even though I don't have the energy or I don't feel like it. But you've already processed in your head, this is what it'll be like when I'm better. So you have set goal for yourself, I think.
Yeah. This is, I know when we look at these, man, when it comes to that, putting on a happy face, I love that we can, when we say forefront with it, we want to be real and authentic here. This past week, I texted, it was Friday. I was sitting on the beach. I wasn't planning on sharing this. I was sitting on the beach because I woke up and I was like, I don't want to take the kids to school. I don't want to function today. So I'm going to go down to the beach and sit. And so I texted my wife, and I took a video, and everybody's like, oh, I like the video. It's so peaceful, whatever. And I was sitting on the beach going like, God, why do I have these days? I have a great family, amazing church, and all this stuff. And like, it's okay to process those days. But there's a fine balance in processing those days and knowing that, and this is what I tell myself. There are days where you just got to put on your big boy, your big girl pants, whatever, and you got to do work. You got to take care of what happens, what's going on, so you then can take care of yourself. And you have those relationships that come into play here. This question: how do you trust people? How do you let people in? You got to start. I think Chris's comment was great. You got to be careful who you let in. You have to let somebody in. But don't let everybody in. Please don't go to social networking on the day that you're frustrated or you're hurting or whatever and put it on there. From someone who's done it, that's just bad idea because it just opens up a can of worms. That's not what it's made for. We can exist without that, but I think it's true. Bringing in the right person.
Yeah, I think it's okay to cut people out of your life. And that might sound harsh to some of y'all. I told these guys a story when we were discussing these questions. When I was in college, I had a particular sin that I was trying to conquer that was almost like an addiction. And I brought another guy in with me who said he was having the same sort of issue, and we talked about it, and we were going to hold each other accountable. But he ended up actually providing more avenues for me to engage. And I just had to look at him and was like, hey, look, I told you, like, I'm trying to be done with this. If you're not there with me, like, that's your life. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I can't hang out with you because I don't want to keep doing this. And so as you work through anger, anxiety, depression, whatever, if there are relationships in your life, friendships, co-workers, people you see out in the community, if you're able to, I think you can clearly explain, here's where I'm at, here's where I'm trying to get, and dude, you're holding me back. It's a little more complex if you're talking about family or a spouse, for sure.
People may not understand either.
Yeah.
People may not understand, and that's just going to have to be okay. It's a risk, but you're talking about your health here and your future and your well-being. You have to take a risk, and that can be hard, but you have to draw a line in the sand with some people.
With that second part of that question, trusting let people in, you've had hurt. I understand that question because all of us have been hurt by people who we've let in. And I would venture to say that if you, like when Dan says, if you've been breathing more than 5 minutes, you've been hurt by someone who you've let in. Don't let the past hurts dictate a more positive future. And what I mean by that, I don't want you to miss that. Don't let the person that you ended up coming across that hurt you be the one that locks you in that personal prison of that for the rest of your future, when they may no longer be a part of your life. They may be a part of your life, but it's wrecked you, and you need to push that aside. Like Chris said, cut them out. There are plenty of people when I started following God who I was like, man, you're awesome, you're awesome, you're awesome. If I hang out with you, like it's going to go badly, and so I love you, but we're done. And it hurt, but I knew that if I did that, trajectory would just gone downhill. And so there's going to be moments where you just say, I'm not going to let the past dictate my future, and I'm going to open up and be okay with talking with people.
And you learn from that past as well. It doesn't have to dictate, but if you say like, hey, I've gone down this path with this type of person 5 or 6 times, and I've always gotten hurt, then you can learn from that, but you don't write off people as a whole because of those experiences.
I want to close with this. One, I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you for being a church that's okay with talking about this stuff. And not just going like, oh, no, we shouldn't talk about that. That's what we push off into corners and into offices that people talk about that and we don't address it. I love that we get to be a church that says, you know what, we battle these things, and so let's talk about them. This is the encouragement in my battles with anxiety, with depression, all these things. This passage has kept me breathing in and out. It's a guy, Paul, we talk about a lot. He followed God. He killed Christians, and God said, ooh, you're the perfect person to spread my message, which is pretty crazy to me. But God knows better than we know. And as Paul was writing in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, he shared this. But he said to me, saying in Jesus, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect. God's power is made perfect in our weakness. Therefore, I'll boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, for Jesus' sake, I delight in my weaknesses, my insults, my hardships, in persecutions and in difficulties, and this is what I lean into. For when I am weak, then he is strong. It's his strength that gets us through these things as a community, as individuals with him. And my prayer is that you will never stop believing the simple truth that you are uniquely made in the image of God and you are absolutely beautiful. And we are a church that wants to embrace that and empower you to follow him even in the midst of all your stuff. Why don't you pray with me?